The cold seeped into Hans' bones. He tasted it on his tongue, a metallic tang of fear and desperation. He was a ghost in his own country, a shadow flitting through the opulent halls of power, a man condemned by conscience to a fate he both craved and dreaded. It was 1934, and the air in Berlin crackled with a nervous energy. A storm was brewing, a storm of hatred and paranoia, and Hans, a lowly mechanic with grease permanently etched under his fingernails, was about to throw a wrench, literally into its gears. His target, Adolf Hitler. He clutched the spanner tighter. Its cold steel was a comfort, a grounding force in the swirling vortex of his anxiety. The plan was ludicrous, audacious, bordering on suicidal, but the alternative, the slow, insidious erosion of everything he held dear, was unbearable. He had witnessed firsthand the brutality of the SA, the casual cruelty inflicted on anyone who dared to voice dissent. He had seen his Jewish neighbours dragged from their homes, their faces etched with a terror that mirrored his own. He couldn't stand by and watch. He had to act, however futile his actions might seem. His access to Hitler was accidental, a stroke of luck or perhaps a cruel twist of fate. He worked at a small garage frequented by officers of the SS, their sleek black cars symbols of the regime's power. One of those cars, a magnificent Mercedes-Benz 770K Grosser, was Hitler's personal vehicle, meticulously maintained and fiercely guarded. But even the most vigilant guards couldn't account for a mechanic, his hands perpetually stained with oil, his face familiar, his intentions hidden beneath a veneer of quiet subservience. Hans' plan was simple, almost laughably so. He would sabotage the car, not fatally, not immediately, but in a way that would guarantee its failure at a critical moment. He would loosen a crucial bolt in the steering mechanism, just enough to cause the car to veer violently off course during a high-speed journey. It was a gamble. A miscalculation could result in a minor inconvenience, a flat tyre, or worse, the death of innocent bystanders. But the alternative, Hitler continuing his reign of terror, was simply unacceptable. The opportunity presented itself during a routine maintenance check. The car was hoisted on the lift, its underbelly exposed like a vulnerable animal. The guards were lax, distracted by their own conversations, their attention focused on the bustling activity of the garage. Hans feigned a meticulous inspection, his movements slow and deliberate, his face betraying none of the turmoil raging within him. He located the steering mechanism, his heart pounding in his chest. The bolt was easily accessible. A few turns of the spanner and it would be loosened, primed to fail at the most inopportune moment. He hesitated. Doubt gnawed at him. The enormity of his actions weighed heavily on his shoulders. Was he doing the right thing? Was he justified in taking a life, even the life of a monster? The faces of his neighbours flashed before his eyes, their fear, their despair, their silent plea for help. He clenched his jaw. He had made his decision. He tightened his grip on the spanner and with a deep breath he began to turn the bolt. Suddenly a voice shattered the silence. "What are you doing, Hans?" Hans froze, his blood turning to ice. He slowly turned around, his eyes meeting the cold, piercing gaze of Hauptsturmführer Schmidt, a high-ranking SS officer known for his ruthlessness and unwavering loyalty to Hitler. Schmidt stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable, but his eyes betrayed a suspicion that sent a shiver down Hans's spine. "Just checking the steering mechanism, Herr Hauptsturmführer," Hans stammered, his voice trembling. "Routine maintenance." Schmidt's eyes narrowed. "Routine maintenance? On the Führer's car?" "I wasn't informed." Hans swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had to think fast. He had to come up with a plausible explanation. I noticed a slight vibration in the steering wheel during the last test drive, Herr Hauptsturmführer. I thought it best to investigate immediately before it became a more serious problem." Schmidt remained silent for a moment, his eyes scrutinizing Hans' every move. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, amplifying the pounding of Hans' heart. Finally Schmidt spoke, his voice low and menacing. "Show me." Hans' legs felt like lead as he approached the steering mechanism. He pointed to the bolt he had been tampering with. "See, Herr Hauptsturmführer? It seems a little loose. I was just tightening it." He feigned a struggle, pretending to tighten the bolt further. Schmidt watched him intently, his eyes never leaving Hans' face. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally nodded. "Very well. See that it's done properly. The Führer's safety is paramount." He turned and walked away, his boots clicking ominously on the concrete floor. Hans slumped against the car, his body trembling with relief and exhaustion. He had survived. He had narrowly avoided detection. But he knew that he had been warned. He was under suspicion now, his every move being watched. He couldn't try again, not here, not in this garage. His first attempt at assassinating Hitler had failed, but it wouldn't be his last. He was determined to find another way, another opportunity to strike a blow against the tyranny that was consuming his country. The cold seeped into his bones once more, but this time it was not the cold of fear, but the cold of determination. He had tasted failure, but he would not be deterred. He would continue to plot, to scheme, to wait for his moment. The fate of Germany, perhaps the fate of the world, depended on it. The weight of Schmidt's suspicion pressed down on Hans like a physical burden. He felt it in every glance, every seemingly casual question, every moment of strained silence. He had to disappear, not physically but mentally, professionally. He became the model mechanic, the epitome of efficiency and obedience. He anticipated needs, preempted problems, and avoided drawing any attention to himself. He was a ghost, a machine, a cog in the Nazi war machine, all the while secretly nurturing the embers of rebellion within his heart. He knew another opportunity would present itself, but he couldn't afford to be reckless. He needed a plan, a foolproof plan, one that wouldn't leave a trace back to him. Weeks turned into months. The political climate grew increasingly volatile. Hitler's speeches became more bellicose, more filled with promises of conquest and racial purity. The persecution of the Jews intensified, their businesses boycotted, their synagogues desecrated. Hans watched in helpless rage, his desire for action growing stronger with each passing day. He haunted the local library, poring over books on explosives, sabotage, and military strategy, seeking inspiration, searching for a weakness in the seemingly impenetrable armour of the Nazi regime. One day, while servicing the car of a high-ranking Luftwaffe officer, he overheard a conversation that sparked a new idea, a new hope. The officer was discussing Hitler's upcoming visit to a military airfield outside of Berlin, a public relations event designed to showcase the Luftwaffe's latest aircraft and bolster morale. Hitler would be inspecting the planes, delivering a rousing speech, and interacting with the troops. It was a perfect opportunity, a chance to strike at the heart of the beast in a setting far removed from the watchful eyes of the SS. Hans focused on gathering information. He learned the exact date of the visit, the layout of the airfield, the route Hitler's motorcade would take, and the security measures in place. He discovered that Hitler would be standing on a raised platform during his speech, surrounded by a select group of officers and dignitaries. The platform was accessible by a short flight of steps, and the area beneath it was relatively unguarded. An idea began to form in his mind, a daring and dangerous plan that involved explosives, timing, and a considerable amount of luck. He needed help. He couldn't do it alone. He sought out a trusted friend, a former comrade from his days in the First World War, a man named Erich. Erich was a disillusioned veteran, bitter and resentful of the Nazi regime, but also cautious and pragmatic. Hans knew that convincing him to participate in such a risky endeavour would be a challenge. He met Erich in a secluded corner of a local park, away from prying eyes and listening ears. He laid out his plan, detailing every aspect of the operation, emphasizing the potential impact it could have on the course of the war. Erich listened intently, his face etched with a mixture of skepticism and fascination. "You're insane, Hans," Erich said, shaking his head. "It's suicide. They'll catch us, torture us, and make an example of us." "I know the risks, Erich," Hans replied, his voice firm. "But what choice do we have? Are we going to stand by and watch as Hitler destroys our country, as he plunges the world into war? We have to do something, anything to stop him." Erich remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the ground. He knew that Hans was right. He couldn't deny the truth of his words, but the fear of reprisal, the fear of death, was a powerful deterrent. "What do you need me to do?" Erich finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Hans felt a surge of hope. "I need your help to acquire the explosives. I know you have contacts in the resistance. People who can get us what we need," Erich nodded. "I can do that, but it will take time, and it will be dangerous." "We don't have much time, Erich," Hans said. "Hitler's visit is in 2 weeks." The next 2 weeks were a blur of frantic activity. Erich made contact with his resistance network, securing a supply of plastic explosives and detonators. Hans, meanwhile, focused on preparing the bomb and devising a method of smuggling it onto the airfield. He constructed a false bottom for a toolbox, concealing the explosives beneath a layer of tools and rags. He planned to pose as a maintenance worker, gaining access to the airfield under the pretense of repairing some faulty electrical wiring. The day of Hitler's visit arrived, cold and overcast. Hans and Erich met before dawn, their faces pale with anxiety. They checked their equipment one last time, making sure that everything was in order. They knew that this was it. There was no turning back. Hans drove to the airfield, his heart pounding in his chest. He presented his forged credentials to the security guards, feigning confidence, trying to conceal his nervousness. To his relief, the guards waved him through without incident. Once inside the airfield, Hans made his way to the area beneath the platform where Hitler was scheduled to speak. He found a secluded spot, out of sight of the security personnel, and began to prepare the bomb. He carefully placed the explosives against one of the platform's support beams, attaching the detonator and setting the timer. As he worked, he could hear the roar of engines in the distance. Hitler's motorcade was approaching. He had to hurry. He double-checked the timer, ensuring that it was set to detonate just as Hitler began his speech. He then concealed the bomb with some loose debris, making it appear as if the area was simply under construction. He retreated to a safe distance, his eyes fixed on the platform. He could see Hitler emerging from his car, surrounded by his entourage. The crowd erupted in cheers, waving flags and chanting slogans. Hitler ascended the steps to the platform, his face beaming with confidence. He approached the microphone, ready to deliver his message of hate and domination. Hans held his breath, his finger hovering over the detonator switch. He waited for the perfect moment, the moment when Hitler began to speak. But then, something unexpected happened. A young boy, overcome with enthusiasm, broke through the security cordon and ran towards Hitler, clutching a bouquet of flowers. The SS guards reacted instantly, tackling the boy to the ground and dragging him away. The commotion distracted Hitler, momentarily disrupting his composure. He paused, his eyes narrowing with irritation. Hans hesitated. He couldn't detonate the bomb with the boy so close to the platform. He had to wait. But as he waited, he noticed something else. One of the SS guards, a man with a particularly sharp eye, was looking directly at him. Their eyes met, and Hans knew that he had been spotted. The guard began to move towards him, his hand reaching for his holster. Hans knew that he had to act fast. He slammed his hand down on the detonator switch. Nothing happened. He pressed the switch again, harder this time. Still nothing. The detonator had failed. The SS guard was almost upon him. Hans knew that he was caught. He had failed. His second attempt to assassinate Hitler had ended in disaster. Hans didn't wait for the SS guard to reach him. He bolted, a desperate, instinctual flight for survival. The airfield erupted in chaos. Sirens wailed, guards shouted, and the crowd scattered in panic. He could hear the thud of boots behind him, the guttural cries of pursuers closing in. He weaved through rows of parked aircraft, his lungs burning, his legs aching, his mind racing to find an escape. He knew that his chances were slim. The airfield was a vast open space, surrounded by fences and heavily guarded checkpoints. But he had to try. He had to fight for every breath, for every second of freedom. He spotted a hangar in the distance, its doors slightly ajar. It was his only chance. He sprinted towards it, dodging obstacles and ignoring the shouts of his pursuers. He reached the hangar and slipped inside, slamming the doors shut behind him. The hangar was dark and cavernous, filled with the hulking shapes of disassembled aircraft. He stumbled through the darkness, his hands outstretched, searching for a hiding place. He found a stack of crates in a corner and squeezed behind them, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the guards outside, their voices growing louder as they searched the hangar. He held his breath, praying that they wouldn't find him. He closed his eyes, trying to calm his racing heart, trying to think of a plan. Suddenly he heard a noise, a faint scraping sound coming from the far end of the hangar. He opened his eyes and peered into the darkness. He saw a figure moving in the shadows, a silhouette slowly emerging from the gloom. He tensed, ready to fight. He didn't know who it was, but he couldn't afford to take any chances. The figure stepped into the light. It was a woman, dressed in overalls, her face smudged with grease. She looked at him with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice low and cautious. "What are you doing here?" Hans hesitated. He didn't know if he could trust her, but he was running out of options. I'm hiding," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The SS are after me." The woman's eyes widened. "The SS? What did you do?" I tried to assassinate Hitler," Hans confessed, his voice trembling. The woman stared at him in disbelief. "You tried to assassinate Hitler? Are you crazy?" "Maybe," Hans replied. "But I had to do something. He's destroying our country." The woman remained silent for a moment, her eyes searching his face. She seemed to be trying to decide whether to believe him, whether to help him. Finally she spoke. "Follow me," she said. "I can't promise you safety, but I can give you a place to hide for now." Hans followed her deeper into the hangar, past rows of disassembled aircraft and piles of spare parts. She led him to a small, cluttered office at the back of the hangar. "This is my office," she said. "It's not much, but it's private." "You can stay here for a while," Hans thanked her, his gratitude overwhelming. He didn't know her name, but he owed her his life. "My name is Greta," she said, as if reading his mind. "I'm an aircraft mechanic." "I'm Hans," he replied. "I'm a mechanic too." Greta offered him a cup of coffee and a piece of bread. He ate ravenously, his hunger overwhelming. "Why are you helping me?" he asked after he had finished eating. "You could be arrested for harbouring a fugitive," Greta sighed. "I don't support Hitler," she said. "I've seen what he's done to our country. I've seen the suffering he's caused. I don't have the courage to fight him openly, but I can't stand by and do nothing." Hans felt a surge of respect for Greta. She was a brave woman, risking her life to help a stranger. "What are you going to do now?" Greta asked. "You can't stay here forever." "The SS will be searching the airfield thoroughly." Hans knew that she was right. He had to find a way to escape, to disappear before the SS found him. "I need to get out of Berlin," he said. "I need to get to Switzerland. I have friends there who can help me." "Switzerland is a long way," Greta said, "and the border is heavily guarded." "I know," Hans replied, "but it's my only chance." Greta thought for a moment. "I might be able to help you," she said. "There's a small cargo plane that leaves the airfield every night delivering supplies to a military base near the Swiss border." "I can try to get you on board," Hans' heart leaped with hope. "That would be incredible, Greta." Thank you, Greta warned him that it would be dangerous. The plane was heavily guarded and the pilots were loyal Nazis, but it was his only chance. That night, Greta smuggled Hans onto the cargo plane, hiding him among crates of ammunition and supplies. The plane took off under the cover of darkness, its engines roaring, its wings slicing through the night sky. Hans lay hidden in the cargo hold, his body trembling with fear and exhaustion. He didn't know what the future held, but he was one step closer to freedom. He had escaped the clutches of the SS, thanks to the courage and compassion of a stranger. As the plane soared through the night, Hans reflected on his failed assassination attempt. He had come so close, but a series of unfortunate events had conspired against him. The faulty detonator, the overzealous boy, the watchful SS guard. It all seemed like a cruel twist of fate. But he refused to give up. He had failed twice, but he would not be deterred. He was determined to find another way, another opportunity, to strike a blow against Hitler and his regime. He owed it to his country, to his friends, to Greta, and to himself. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with danger and uncertainty. But he was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He had survived 2 assassination attempts, and he would survive whatever came next. He was a survivor, a fighter, a man driven by a burning desire for justice. He would not rest until Hitler was brought to justice. His 3rd attempt was in the works. The cargo plane landed roughly at the military base, jolting Hans awake from a fitful sleep. The air was frigid, biting at his exposed skin as he cautiously peered out from beneath the tarpaulin covering the crates. He could hear the shouts of soldiers unloading the cargo, their voices harsh and authoritative. He had to get off the plane unnoticed. One wrong move and he would be captured, his dreams of freedom shattered. He waited patiently until the unloading was nearly complete, the area around the plane relatively deserted. Then, with a silent prayer, he slipped out from under the tarpaulin and darted towards the perimeter fence, his movements swift and decisive. He scaled the fence, his muscles straining, his heart pounding in his chest. He dropped to the ground on the other side, landing with a muffled thud. He found himself in a dense forest, the trees providing welcome cover. He ran, his legs pumping, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He ran until he could no longer hear the sounds of the military base, until he felt safe enough to stop and catch his breath. He was in unfamiliar territory, alone and vulnerable. He had no map, no compass, no food, and no idea which direction to go. He was completely reliant on his instincts and his determination to reach Switzerland. He walked for days, navigating by the sun and the stars, scavenging for food and water. He slept in caves and under trees, constantly alert for danger. He encountered wild animals, suspicious farmers, and patrols of border guards. He narrowly avoided capture, on several occasions relying on his wits and his resourcefulness to survive. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he reached the Swiss border. He approached it cautiously, scouting the area for signs of activity. He found a break in the fence, a spot where the wire had been cut, presumably by other refugees seeking asylum. He slipped through the gap and stepped onto Swiss soil, his heart filled with relief and gratitude. He made his way to a nearby town and contacted his friends, a group of exiled German intellectuals who had been critical of the Nazi regime. They welcomed him with open arms, providing him with food, shelter, and a new identity. He spent the next few years in Switzerland, living a quiet and unassuming life. He worked as a mechanic, repairing cars and motorcycles. He kept a low profile, avoiding any involvement in political activities. But he never forgot his mission. He never abandoned his desire to bring Hitler to justice. He followed the news closely, tracking the progress of the war. He learned of the atrocities committed by the Nazis, the massacres, the concentration camps, the systematic extermination of entire populations. He felt a growing sense of guilt and responsibility. He had failed to stop Hitler, and the consequences were devastating. One day, he was approached by a representative of the Allied intelligence services. They knew about his previous attempts to assassinate Hitler, and they wanted his help. They were planning a new operation, a daring raid on Hitler's mountain retreat in Berchtesgaden. They needed someone who knew Hitler's habits, someone who could identify weaknesses in the security arrangements. They needed Hans. Hans agreed to help, eager to redeem himself for his past failures. He spent weeks studying maps of Berchtesgaden, analysing photographs of Hitler's residence, and providing the Allied planners with detailed information about Hitler's daily routine. He identified a blind spot in the security perimeter, a narrow path through the woods that led directly to Hitler's private study. He suggested a plan to infiltrate the residence using a team of specially trained commandos, their mission to capture or kill Hitler. The Allied planners approved the plan, and the operation was launched. Hans waited anxiously for news, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that the success of the operation depended on his information, on his ability to anticipate Hitler's movements. Days turned into weeks, and still no word. Hans grew increasingly despondent, fearing that the operation had failed. Then, one morning he received a telegram. It was a single word: success. Hans collapsed in tears, overwhelmed with relief and joy. Hitler was dead. The war was over. The world was finally free. He had played a crucial role in bringing down the Nazi regime, in ending the reign of terror that had gripped Europe for so long. He had finally achieved his mission, albeit indirectly. He returned to Germany after the war, a changed man. He was no longer the idealistic young mechanic who had dreamed of assassinating Hitler. He was a hardened veteran, scarred by the horrors he had witnessed, but also filled with a quiet sense of pride and accomplishment. He lived out his days in peace, tending to a small garden and spending time with his family. He never spoke of his past, of his attempts to assassinate Hitler. He preferred to keep those memories buried deep inside, a reminder of the dark times he had lived through. But he never forgot the lessons he had learned, the importance of courage, the power of resistance, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. He knew that even in the darkest of times there was always hope, and he knew that even the smallest act of defiance could make a difference. He had failed 5 times, and it was the 6th attempt that others succeeded in, partly thanks to his contributions. His legacy lived on, not in grand monuments or heroic tales, but in the quiet dignity of his life, in his unwavering commitment to justice,